Today we're going to talk about minor parties, sometimes referred to as third parties. So you know that we're a two-party system, which means that in any given election, there's really only two parties that have a chance of winning. And in our country, that's the Democratic and Republican Party. What that does not mean is that they are the only two parties that exist. There are lots of parties in the United States. It's just these third parties, these minor parties, don't really have a chance to win. So why do they exist if they can't win? Well, that's one of the questions we'll be answering today. Type of third party we call ideological third parties. Now, ideological parties emerge from a particular spot on the flatline spectrum, which means that they share an ideology. They have a shared set of values and beliefs. Okay? So some classic ideological parties are the Green Party, the Constitution Party, and the Libertarian Party. So let's put them up here and then we'll talk a little bit about them. So the Green Party typically exists down here at this end of the spectrum. You'll note that I'm drawing their umbrella differently. Okay? Green Party. So one key difference between an ideological third party and a major party is that the ideological third party is attached to the spectrum. For them, ideology is more important than winning, which kind of makes sense, because if this is where the majority of votes are on the national level, can the Green Party ever win a national election? No, they don't really have a chance. However, they are long-lived, okay? So they have a full-on platform because they take positions on a wide variety of issues, and they appeal to this narrow segment of the electorate. But there will always be people down here that the Green Party resonates with them. Now, though they might win nationally, they might have a better chance in Minneapolis where the electorate line is drawn like this. And the zenith, the bubble, is going to be situated over here, okay? Now, you will note that who does the Green Party actually compete with for votes? That's right, they're competing with the Democratic Party, but we're going to talk more about that later. Let's look at another ideological party down at this end of the spectrum. So down at this end of the spectrum, again, attached to ideology. Let's see if I can draw their umbrella okay. Boom. Is we have the Constitution Party. Okay? Again, they emerge from a narrow slice of the electorate right here. And usually they can exist in this area of the spectrum where there's not too many voters, where there's not too much competition for their votes. Okay? Now, we also have a third ideological party as an example, which is the Libertarian Party, which is a quadrant 4 party. So when you get to the Libertarian Party, you have to be willing to divide them up and put them on both sides. So I would draw the Libertarian Party down here, but they're going to be down here socially. And I would draw the Libertarian Party down here, a very narrow umbrella, but they're down here economically. So they appeal to those quadrant 4 people that we've actually divided and placed on both ends of the flatline spectrum, right? That's your ideological third party, okay? Now, just to review their characteristics. Okay, so national elections, they can't win. Okay, it's not going to happen. Can't win. All right? However, they are long-lived. They exist for a long period of time because they take positions on a wide variety of issues, all right? And they always appeal to this segment of the population. All right, let's move on to the next type. So our next type of third party is called a single issue party, and you're right, you can probably guess what that means, is they take one stance on one issue, and that's all they care about. Okay, so our example comes from the late 70s, early 80s. It was called the Right to Life Party. And let me draw their umbrella, because their umbrella will kind of explain some key characteristics of this type of third party. Okay? So I'm going to draw it like this. Right? So they appeal to a wider spectrum of voter because there's more people that would actually, agree with that particular stance on that issue. So Right to Life was a party that was only concerned with abortion, and they wanted to get abortion banned. They were pro-life. And what happened is you'll note that they have a better chance of winning in those communities, in those states where the electorate line is going to be over conservative. But who are they competing with for votes? If the Right to Life party started to win, and they did in the late 70s, early 80s, they started to win some statewide offices, and who was losing those positions then? Okay, the Right to Life party is not competing with the Democrats, they're competing with Republicans. So Republicans started to lose elections to this party. And what did the Republican Party do in response? Is they adopted that issue as in their platform. The Republican Party became the party that said, all right, you know what we're going to do is we're going to take that and put it into our platform. We are now going to be the pro-life party. And the Right to Life party was probably okay with that. Because for them, again, as a third party, you'll note their umbrella is attached to ideology. Ideology was more important than winning the elections. And who would be in a better position to make this the law of the land? You're right, the Republican Party would be. So when the Republican Party adopted their issue, they ceased to exist. And they were probably okay with that. So our characteristics of the single issue party over here is they have a better chance to win. Probably statewide, local elections, but not so much at the national level. But however, they are very short-lived. If they actually start to find success, then one of the two major parties will just adopt that issue into their platform, and they have no other stances on any other issues, so they just kind of disappear and go away. All right, let's move on to the next one. So our third type of minor party we call a splinter party. Now, splinter parties are unique in that they don't exist below here. Okay, so they exist up here with the major parties. Because what happens is a major party is going to splinter. So it might be down here at this end of the umbrella. Usually, well, almost always, it's going to be organized around a charismatic figure that lost the nomination. So you have a couple of Republicans that are competing to be the Republicans' candidate for president. One person gets selected, another person is upset about that, and they leave the Republican Party and form their own party and run against that person. That happened in 1912 when Teddy Roosevelt left the Republican Party. He started the Bull Moose Progressives. And what ended up happening is that the Democrats won that election, which makes sense because all of a sudden the Democrats are trying to capture this segment of the electorate, and you had two Republicans that were competing for this vote right here. So it's unlikely that if you have a splinter party, it's going to cause the former party to lose the election. Usually they form quickly and then they disband quickly, because after the election of 1912, Teddy Roosevelt rejoined the Republican Party, and that other party, the Bull Moose Progressives, they just ceased to exist. But every now and then people talk about this. They're like, hey, maybe there's going to be a splinter. So they did that back in 2016 with Hillary Clinton when she got the nomination, and Bernie Sanders people were really upset about that there might have been a splinter at this end of the Democratic Party, and Bernie would run his own presidential campaign. Okay? Didn't happen. Doesn't happen that much in modern history. Or does it? Okay. Let's move on to the next one. Before we could talk about our last type of third or minor party, we have to kind of look back at ideological third parties, right? So ideological third parties, the Constitution and the Green we have up here as examples, we know emerge from a particular spot on the spectrum. They are sometimes described as being broad, and that's broad in that they take a wide variety of stances on a lot of issues. Okay, so they would always appeal to this end of the political spectrum. They're long-lived because they take so many positions on issues. The question that we have is, why don't ideological parties appear in the middle? You got a better chance of winning if you appear in the middle of the spectrum. Now, the answer to that is the fact that we got the Republicans and the Democrats up here that aren't attached to the spectrum. They're much more concerned with winning. Winning first, ideology second. Okay, down here, you're always going to be concerned with ideology first. You don't necessarily care as much about winning. You're more concerned about your solutions. You think your solutions are correct and right for the country, and if you don't win, you don't win, right? Well, up here, if you try to exist in the middle, and you're trying to propose moderate solutions, you are competing with two major parties that have dominance when it comes to fundraising. Okay, so they have all of the resources, and you will not have many resources. You won't exist long in the middle. Down here at this end, you know, the Democrats often take you for advantage. They're just like, hey, we don't have to worry about the Green Party. They can't ever beat us, right? Who cares if we lose this many votes when we actually need these votes to win? Right? Now, on to economic protests, though. So every now and then, there is a third party that emerges because there is an economic recession. There's an economic depression. And when it deals with the economics, it's going to affect a large segment of the society. And if it affects a lot of people, that means you're going to be affecting a lot of people that are moderates. So an economic protest party might actually emerge right here in the middle. Now, some people would disagree, and they would characterize this party as a splinter party. So back in the 90s, you had a party that purported to be moderate, and it was called the Reform Party. It later became, nationally it was the Reform Party, and it was headed up by a gentleman called Ross Perot, right? Now, Ross Perot was a former Republican, and people said he was charismatic, and maybe it was a splinter party. He left the Republican Party, formed his own party. But really, it was kind of catering to economic distress, that the two major parties were not addressing the economic needs of the people. Now, Ross Perot only got about 20% of the vote, so he didn't really, once he lost, his party ceased to exist. However, in Minnesota, this became the Independence Party of Minnesota. Okay, well, first it was the Reform Party. And I'm getting my things out of here. So, put this back up here. Okay. Yeah. All right. However, in Minnesota, there was a little different story that happened surrounding the Reform Party. They were able to get a candidate that was very charismatic, former professional wrestler, Jesse Ventura. Now, the party itself was moderate, the Reform Party. Jesse Ventura, as we discussed with ideology, he wasn't. Okay, but it was another reason why the public would think this Quadrant 4 person was moderate, is because his party was purported to be moderate. Right? Jesse actually was able to be successful in the middle. He won the election. Now, he chose not to run for a second term. But if he had, and he had won, this is how we see the two-party system change historically. Because the Democrats and the Republicans haven't always been the two parties. And now in a two-party system, there's always two dominant parties, but it wasn't always these two parties. So it can change over time, and this is how it changes. If that party, that third party, is successful in the middle, they're going to move up here. And they're going to push one of these two parties to the sides. And all of a sudden, if the Democrats are over here and are competing for this segment, can you still call them a major party? No, they would probably drop down and become an ideological third party. This party moves up here and occupies this space. Okay? All right, so that's how you see change in the two-party system.